Connecting community, creating impact. This is the Chamber Link.
Well, welcome back to our listeners on the Chamber Link. My name is Cale Dunwoody, and I serve as the Vice President of Public Policy for the Fargo, Moorhead, West Fargo Chamber of Commerce. We just get past a really important election, primary election in North Dakota, and I wanted to bring together two newly elected leaders who will be shaping the future of our entire community. Today, joining me on the Chamber Link is Mayor-elect Josh Boschee of Fargo and Mayor-elect Eric Gjerdevig of West Fargo. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Well, I want to really kind of take a look at and understand a little bit more about yourselves, your backgrounds, and then really start talking about your vision as mayor and where you see the community going. Like we were just chatting before the show here, is we are kind of on that pivotal point of that exponential curve where we could really, as a community, take off on that exponential curve and have a lot of great things happen to us and benefit the community. So just want to talk a little bit about that over the next hour here. Appreciate you both joining us. So maybe just first we'll start with Josh, is just maybe talk a little bit more about yourself and your background, just to give listeners a little bit more. I'm sure they heard a lot about you during the campaign, but just now that we're past the 30-second ads and all those fun things, just talk a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. So Fargo has been home for me for the last 26 years. I attended NDSU and have stuck around ever since. My first career was working in higher education, worked over at North Dakota State University, and my last job in higher ed was over at MSUM, and then I was elected to the State House in 2012. So when I took that opportunity to represent North Fargo and Bismarck, decided to switch over into real estate, and so since 2013 I've been a real estate agent and broker with, at that time, was Hatch Realty, and now we're with Real Broker, a national brand that we're aligned with. Elected to the state senate in 2024, and threw my name in the hat to be Fargo's 36th mayor. Really wanting to build on the things that I was able to accomplish in Bismarck and come home to help lead this great city in our community. And so it's been an exciting journey over the last 6 months through the campaign. But I think what I took away really from the campaign most of all is it made me love this city even more, but also I got to hear how much other people really love calling Fargo home. And, people are really invested here, whether they're starting a family, starting or growing a business, choosing to get their education here. But our metro area is obviously a place of opportunity and creativity. And that was fun to learn more about during the campaign. So I look forward to taking that for the next 4 years and moving us forward.
Great. Well, thank you for throwing your hat in the ring, and congratulations. I know that was a tough race for you on your side of things. 5-way race isn't easy, and just nice job on that. We'll shift over to Eric here. If you want to just talk a little bit more. Your race was a little bit different, but let's maybe talk a little bit about your background, then we can jump into the race here later on too.
So I spent, so I've lived in West Fargo my entire life. I spent the first 20 years of my career in the tech industry working at Great Plains Software, Microsoft, and then the last 13 leading a software consulting firm that I founded with a friend of mine. Had the opportunity to exit that business at the end of 2017 and took advantage of that. I did run and was elected to the commission in early 2018, and I always say I sort of accidentally stumbled into teaching at NDSU that fall. A few weeks before fall semester in 2018, I got asked if I wanted to teach a sales class and gave it no thought whatsoever. I was like, sure, why not? I got nothing going on. And worked as an adjunct there for a few years, and now I've been there full time for the last 5. So,
great. Well, just again, appreciate you running for mayor, throwing your hat in the ring. As you both know, civic engagement is really important to the chamber, and so we need good people to run for office. So we also need good people to show up at the ballot box and elect good representatives, whether that be school board, park board, mayor, all the way up to members of Congress and they're on. So running for mayor isn't something that you probably take lightly. And maybe talk a little bit about why you ran for mayor. What was the draw for running for mayor, maybe elected office a little bit as well? Because it's one of those things you probably don't wake up every single day and say, I want to be the next mayor of Fargo or West Fargo when you were a kid or whatever it may be. But what drew you to this position, and why did you decide to throw your hat in the ring? And we'll start with you first, Mayor.
Yeah, so when I first ran for the commission in 2018, it was, I've just always believed in public service. So, I think that was honestly kind of the main driver. And then I did not run for re-election in 2022 and kind of missed it, to be quite honest with you. I kind of missed, that level of involvement with my city government. And when, I got to thinking earlier this year, and, I was pretty certain, I wasn't sure 100%, but I was pretty certain that our current mayor, Mayor Dardis, was not going to run for re-election, and decided that it was, a great time to take advantage of that. So,
Great. Josh, why did you decide to jump in that 5-way race and throw your hat in the ring for Fargo's mayor?
Well, we knew that Mayor Mahoney would be retiring with him being term limited, and he's done, him and Mayor Dardis over in West Fargo have done moved mountains to build infrastructure in this community, whether it's to keep water from flooding our communities, to getting water from the western part of the state, but even then the regionalization of wastewater treatment and clean drinking water. So they've set us up for success in terms of our ability to grow. And when I really toyed with the idea of do I run for mayor or not, I looked at some of the conversations that the current city commission was having, and I just felt that they weren't necessarily the most productive conversations, and put on my real estate hat with my policy hat and said, we were able to get some things done last session around affordable housing and making sure that there is some reliability throughout the state for us to be able to make sure people can continue to afford to call North Dakota home. So I wanted to bring that to Fargo, to City Hall. How do we look at planned growth and smart growth? How do we make sure that it's affordable for families to live and for young adults to start their careers here? And really do it through what I love about public service is the engagement piece, connecting with folks, not just during the campaign, but having ongoing conversations. And I think the best way to have those conversations is proactively. Mayor-elect Gjerdevig and I were able to have coffee yesterday afternoon, and we talked about a couple ideas we spit around about where can we do that together. As our communities are so intertwined already, how do we talk about economic development and job opportunities and the strengths of our communities throughout the metro to make sure that, someone might choose to live in West Fargo, but they're going to work in Fargo or vice versa. So how do we make sure that we work together to make this an even better place to call home?
Well, and you both have done such a great job getting together right away, not letting any dust settle after the election, just getting out and being in the community and conversating with each other and other elected officials. Just appreciate that leadership, and that's kind of what I want to just dive into here quick before our first break is just leadership, your leadership styles, things like that. Talk a little bit more about your leadership style and how your experiences have shaped that leadership style and what you hope to bring as mayor. And we'll start with you, Mayor-elect Boschee.
Yeah, I consider my style to be very collaborative. And I'm learning actually that might be challenging coming from the legislature to local government because of trying to, being respectful of open meeting laws and not meeting quorum. Because for me, it's about how do we have good conversation with, the decision makers, which would be the commissioners, as well as stakeholders. And so really looking at how can we spitball ideas in a way that's non-threatening to each other and respecting open meeting laws. So, some of the commissioners and I have already started having discussions about doing more brown bags where we're sitting in the city commission talking about things around housing or workforce development or whatever the flavor of the week is, but being okay and creating a culture where we're going to be able to ask questions. We don't have all the answers. How do we have stakeholders at the table and do it as a learning opportunity? And have that dialogue on the dais when we're making the final decisions, if that's where we head with things. But again, doing it from a collaborative standpoint. And that's really, it was interesting to the campaign watching, the chamber hosted some forums for both the mayor and the commission candidates, League of Women Voters, a couple other groups, but watching all the commission candidates during their forum, how they were just, even as candidates, very collegial. They all were talking about how they'd like to work together. It was very focused on kind of being the antithesis to what they were seeing with the previous commission. And so, again, that's carried over into as we continue the conversations forward. So that collaborative leadership is really where I see my strength, and whether it's the commission or the community.
Great. Mayor-elect Gjerdevig.
Yeah, when I think of leadership style, I'll go back to what I tell my students in the sales program at NDSU all the time, and that is that listening is a far more important skill than speaking. And I think it starts with that, right? I want to be somebody who's super approachable, I mentioned this in an interview last week. My wife questioned my logic about a mailing I did. I didn't have the competitors that you did. I still did a mailing out to likely voters, and right on there I put my personal cell phone number and my personal email because I want to be reachable, right? Like I want people to reach out if they want to talk, if they have a question, if they have a concern. I think that's job number one. So.
Great. Well, let's move to our first break here, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the campaign trail. We'll be back on the Chamber Link in just a few minutes. Well, welcome back to the Chamber Link. I'm your host, Cale Dunwoody, and I'm joined this morning by West Fargo Mayor-elect Eric Gjerdevig and Fargo Mayor-elect Josh Boschee. We just got done talking a little bit about their backgrounds and experiences, and now I want to spend this next segment talking a little bit about the campaign. We touched on it just briefly, but really want to hear what you heard from residents, businesses, and community leaders throughout your time on the campaign trail. So, Mayor-elect Gjerdevig, we'll start with you. And as you were out on the campaign trail, maybe talk about some of the things that you were doing, and what were some of the common themes that you were hearing from residents and folks out in the community during the campaign trail.
Yeah, there were a lot of things brought up, but I would say the common thread that kind of went across most of them was just about growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
West Fargo between 2020 and just a few years ago grew at just an insane rate.
Yeah.
I think we were 15,000 people in 2020, and I think we're probably close to 43,000 now.
Yeah.
And so that, growth and kind of how we grow going forward, because the last few years that has slowed down.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably will stay that way for the next few years. But then with the completion of the diversion and once the new flood maps are certified,
yep.
I think there's huge opportunity for growth. And how we do that sort of responsibly, trying to be really strategic about it, trying not to get too far out in front of our skis, and maybe learn from, the past couple of decades of experience that the city has.
Yeah.
I would say that's probably the number one item.
Great. Josh?
First of all, that's impressive. I guess I didn't realize West Fargo had grown that much. I know in Fargo we talk about the kind of consistent 2% growth that has happened, and maybe how can we hockey stick that if we do some good planning in terms of available lots, specifically in housing, but then also within the commercial side of things. What I heard extensively on the campaign trail, especially as I was knocking doors, was everything's getting more expensive for folks, but specifically housing. And so whether, again, people wanted to buy their home or they were currently renting their home. So it was interesting, I did then a post on Instagram about a conversation I had with some renters and about the idea of then creating a mayor's advisory council on renting. And it was probably the most engagement I had received, a lot of feedback from people about their interest in that. But I was very clear also that it would be a council we'd be bringing renters, property managers, landlords together to talk about what does safe housing look like in Fargo and what's that bar. I think there's a lot of housing, again, owners and property managers doing the right thing, and there's some that maybe aren't. And so it's just a matter of how do we establish that bar that we hold expectations to, especially for folks when they say, my rent keeps going up, but the security door hasn't been fixed in the last year. So what am I paying for? Things like that, just trying to understand, are there best practices? Are there things that need to be in ordinance or not? And then, of course, expectations of tenants when they're renting someone's property.
Yeah. And Mayor-elect Boschee, we'll start with you on this one. Just talk a little bit maybe on the business lens. Obviously, we have a business audience listening to the Chamber Link, and that's what the folks that we serve here at the Chamber is businesses. What were some of the top issues for businesses as you were going to different events and chatting with business leaders? I know we had several different opportunities along with, like you said, the other groups that are in town just to talk with business leaders. What were you hearing on the campaign trail from business leaders specifically?
Yeah, I think a lot of conversations about making sure that there's reliable expectations and partnership with the city. So if I'm going to be investing my business here or growing my business, having a good relationship with the departments that you'd be interacting with, if it's planning, if it's, inspections and things like that, how do we do a better job of maybe speeding up some of those processes, making sure that, again, it's in partnership so that, when we're competing with neighbors to the east and the west, we can have a competitive edge. That's something we have to work on. As someone who represents downtown, West Fargo has done a good job of taking some of our businesses, and they're opening up in West Fargo because of the resources you guys put.
Well, West Fargo is the best Fargo.
So it's, and that's the great thing is we can, be competitive in those things. And that I think is going to improve outcomes for everybody. So yeah, that reliability, but then also, it kind of comes back to the decorum within the City Hall of a number of business leaders were saying it's hard for, I have a regional office here. We'd love to bring more staff here. Well, it's hard for me to convince my CEO out of Chicago that we should invest more in Fargo when you have city leaders not having a clear vision of where we're going. And so from the business community, I heard that loud and clear of they just want, leaders who are good partners, City Hall that they can work with, and, making sure that as they advocate for our community, they're seeing that in the paper as well.
Yeah, great. Eric?
Yeah, I think, from a business standpoint, predictability is really important to businesses in terms of how they interact with government and kind of what they can expect from, different government entities. I think workforce development is certainly always a topic that, the city doesn't really probably play much in regards to, but, that's tied directly into housing and, it's all very interconnected. Yeah, I thought I had another thought there, but it went blank on me.
No worries. Well, and maybe just talk a little bit about the campaign trail, because I think, again, the experiences that you both had were very unique. Again, unopposed in a really tight, 5-way race. And so and we've talked about this a little bit before, but just talk about the work that you were putting into your race. Again, knowing you were unopposed, but also wanting to respect the process and get your name out there and hear from folks. What were you doing over those few months of campaigning? Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it was weird running unopposed. I was telling Josh that yesterday, that when you have a competitor in a race, you're kind of all in. But when you don't, you have to do enough to be taken serious. But I wasn't going to be out there making a Facebook post every few hours and every day, and you kind of have to try to figure out where that line is that makes sense. So it was a very different experience for sure. I tried to engage with a number of different businesses and had, a lot of different city leaders and, across different organizations, not just the city, but, the parks and so forth. And, really tried to just invest that time and, having as many conversations as you could. But, when you're unopposed, you also don't get invited to some of the open forums and stuff like that, which makes sense, right? The candidates in a competitive race should have that opportunity, but you had to work a little harder to get that engagement.
Yeah, for me, certainly I was able, along with the other candidates, take advantage of events hosted by groups like the Chamber, but then I tried to go the extra step and make sure that I was reaching out to small businesses who I didn't know if they were members or not, right? So whether it's retail or restaurants, immigrant-owned businesses, especially as we talk about the master growth plan for Fargo, and having that conversation with those business owners about, as we talk about how Fargo grows or what we do for infill, how do we make sure that we're also talking to businesses, that they're a key partner in that, so that as we invest or we get developers, are they interested in being a part of those conversations in different neighborhoods? And so that got exciting because they hadn't thought about that either. So it was a way to start the conversation.
Yeah, well, and again, with your race, obviously, everybody was trying to be everywhere and do everything and be at the same things. Talk a little bit of how that worked, how that was.
It was tiring to watch.
It was exhausting, certainly, but and at the same time, for me, it was energy building. Being able to engage with, again, people love this community, whether it was at a formal event hosted by an organization or talking to people in a coffee shop. People want to see us succeed, and again, regardless if they voted for me or voted for someone else or didn't vote at all, people really want to see what's best for our metro, and that's where I think, as we have 2 new mayors, potentially in a third over in Moorhead when they have their election, I think for us to really start with that ground level of how do we work together to build on the strength of the 3 previous mayors who have a really good relationship and take it the next step.
Great. Well, we have our next break here that we're going to jump to, so we'll be back on the Chamber Link in just a few minutes. Well, welcome back to the Chamber Link. Your host, Cale Dunwoody, and I'm joined by 2 fantastic newly elected officials, Josh Boschee of Fargo and Eric Gjerdevig of West Fargo. And we just got done talking about their background and starting to talk a little bit about their campaign. And now I want to kind of shift from the background in the campaign to really what's the vision and what are the challenges and opportunities that we're seeing here in our region. And again, from the chamber standpoint, we represent the entire region, and I don't think that there's silos when it comes to these challenges. For instance, housing and childcare and whatever it may be are universal across different communities, and there's different opportunities and challenges. And so I want to talk through those about the overall region, but then also your specific cities, because I think the levers that you all pull might be a little bit different. We were just talking about that for economic development. Is there's some different levers and different philosophies that play into that. So Mayor-elect Gjerdevig, maybe we'll start with you on this one. Is what do you see the biggest challenge facing West Fargo in the next 12 months?
I've already talked about it. It's planning for our growth, and both from a commercial and residential perspective. How we're going to grow and is a big question. I mean, obviously we can grow to the north. There's about 1,500 acres that will be between two diversion channels that is on the south side of the interstate. But if you look at that as an example, that's really an expensive place to develop, because you're talking about probably building two interstate exchanges that not only go over interstate but also go over the Cheyenne diversion. You're talking about a sewer lift station. You're talking about a water tower. To build the first house, if you were going to build housing in there tomorrow, to build the first house, you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure to do it.
Yeah.
So trying to really be smart about how we grow and where, and making sure that we're being responsible about it, I think will absolutely be the top challenge for years to come.
Yeah, and I think, like you had mentioned, is we just saw this exponential growth in West Fargo. I mean, across our entire community. I mean, Horace, West Fargo. It's continued to grow at a really rapid pace, and I think now we've been able to somewhat catch our breath a little bit and maybe be a little bit more proactive instead of reactive. I think we were reacting to a lot of growth because we had the land and the opportunities, and now that's getting a little bit more constrained. So I think that's something we're hearing from a lot of our businesses as well. Mayor-elect Boschee, maybe talk a little bit about Fargo and what you think the largest challenge will be over the next 12 months.
Yeah, I think it's the same challenge as West Fargo and many other communities. It's growth, and how do we do it well? As a legislator, I supported the property tax relief, but that came with a 3% cap on local political subdivisions on their property tax budget. And so, we saw last night at the city commission meeting that conversation around, there's development proposed for South Fargo, but with that also comes demand on snowplow drivers and emergency services, and how do we fund that? And the staff doing their good job of saying, these are going to impact the budget, and we can't just keep growing unchecked because we have this check put on us by the legislature. So then it's up to the city commission to determine how do we do that. And so for Fargo specifically, we have our master growth plan that the city commission adopted in 2024, and that helps give us a path forward on how much outward growth and how much inward growth we should focus on. But the questions that were asked last night at the city commission was also about how do we start determining that ROI? How do we make sure that if we're going to build 150 homes in a new development, yes, there's the upfront cost, as Mayor Gjerdevig talked about, that investment in the first house and then to get the development going, but what might be the return on investment if that's successful? So the risk that we're willing to tolerate in partnership. And last night's proposal for the Fargo City Commission, it was the first development proposal post-growth plan, post-3% cap. So, these developers, I think, are stuck in the middle, and they're rightfully, I think, frustrated, but the staff and the planning commission and the city commission all are trying to figure this out too, to make sure we get it right, because it is, in the end, it's the taxpayers that help pay for it by making sure we can put in streets, we have snowplow drivers, emergency services, get out there, all of the above.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the things, and this was touched on in both of your answers, is housing. Is our community has a significant need for housing units over the next, and this is obviously in your wheelhouse with your real estate hat on, but the MetroCog study said that we needed 16,400 units across our entire community, and it needs to be attainable housing. I think it's not necessarily just low income housing. It's kind of that missing middle we've continued to hear about. And so maybe talk a little bit more about what levers can the city help pull to address housing. And obviously you talked a little bit about it in the state legislature this last legislative session as well. What are we able to do to try to help address that for our community? Because when we talk about that exponential curve, what's kind of holding us back from that exponential curve, it's housing is a major barrier. We can't attract people to our region if they don't have a place that they want, can live or want to live. Talk a little bit about that. What's your philosophy as the next mayor of Fargo?
Yeah, well, first of all, housing is a necessity, but it's also treated like a commodity, and so there's a market for it. And one thing I think we have to do a really good job at is, looking at that MetroCog study and also continuing conversations with people. What type of housing do they want? And I say that from, again, being a North Fargo person. I could name off about 20 individuals who are retirement age, mostly widowed, who are in their house still because they do not want to live in South Fargo. But we're not building housing that would accommodate them, whether it's affordable condos or senior living on the north side, really. And so just doing that would open up 20 houses that then meets that movable middle. So it's not always about building what we necessarily need. It's about how do we figure out that pipeline. The same from as we talk about low income housing. And visiting with the housing advocates, they say that there's plenty of low-income housing, but maybe we have to figure out a program that helps people that are in that stock of housing now to get to the next level of housing, whether it's the concerns they have or the risk to take that. Maybe it's a voucher program that helps a couple $100 to get them up and out. We don't have to go build something that's super expensive to build because it already exists at $500-700 a month, and then we can move people into that. So really looking at that pipeline and planning and implementing that way.
Mayor-elect Gjerdevig, thoughts on housing in West Fargo, how we can individually as the city of West Fargo, but then also collectively as a region help address housing needs?
Yeah, I think whether it's housing or anything related to growth, I think trying to be as proactive as we can, on the housing topic specifically, really trying to work with developers and to see what's possible. I mentioned this a few minutes ago. Our growth in West Fargo has slowed down the last few years. But there's still great opportunities to develop over the next few years, and we have to be as proactive as we can.
Yeah, and maybe Mayor-elect Boschee, just talking about housing. Obviously, it's not just the city that has to do something. It's kind of collectively between the city, the state. I mean, there's a lot of economics that also play, and obviously you could probably talk about this from your background too, Mayor-elect Gjerdevig, is that housing is just such a unique, because you have input costs, you have labor costs, all these things, and right now those aren't labor and input costs aren't also the cheapest thing out there either, and so there's a lot of things going on. So maybe talk a little bit about what should the city do and what is kind of out of the city's control as well.
Yeah. No, and that's exactly right. Things like labor and the cost of timber or shingles, we as the city can't directly impact, right? So it's that reliability that, Mayor-elect Gjerdevig talked about. How do we make sure that there's the ability for people to plan out several years? Again, the development that was talked about last night at the City Commission, as I understand it, they wouldn't even be building the first house for 2 years, but they're trying to get the plans in place because of all the work that has to happen, especially around infrastructure. And that's where at the state level, the Housing Incentive Fund plays an important role. And the conversation I've been having with my colleagues out there is, can we fund that more regularly at a more consistent amount so that there's reliability in a lot of these communities? Fargo, Bismarck, Minot are always going to have a housing project that's going to be able to be financed. Yeah. But Kindred, Castleton, Harwood, smaller communities like that, it's harder to do. So if there is consistency and reliability in some of those funding sources, they can do what they need to do to make sure they can grow development in those communities that then serve, our bigger metro community as they grow. West Fargo used to be the bedroom community. Now you're part of the epicenter of the metro, right? Yep. So what does that look like for housing choice for people, for the market, what people are looking for, and so forth?
Great. We're going to go to our last break here and then come back. And I want to talk a little bit more about economic development and incentives and attraction of the business community. But we'll do that right after we come back from this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Chamberlink. I'm your host, Cale Dunwoody. I'm joined by two newly elected officials in the FMWF community, Mayor-elect Eric Gjerdevig of West Fargo and Mayor-elect Josh Boschee of Fargo. We were just talking a little bit about housing, and I wanted to continue this conversation, but take a spin onto how do we not necessarily develop and attract housing, but it's how do we do that for businesses? How do we look at business attraction development and retention and expansion, and what does that mean for our community, and what levers can the cities individually pull, or again collectively as a region? And so, Mayor-elect Gjerdevig, maybe we'll start with you on this one. And I know we've had this conversation with Mayor Dardis before at the State of the Cities and other things about West Fargo really wants to up their commercial tax base to kind of help diversify. Talk a little bit about what West Fargo is doing now, and then under your leadership, what you hope to do in the future.
Yeah, I'll use a really specific example. One of the, and Josh and I were talking about this a little bit yesterday, one of the really big, somewhat confrontational things that you see happening around the country right now are with data centers. And even the one, that's being built up by Harwood, that was, that came like a freight train into our community, last summer, and was kind of, the project was basically, shovels were in the ground before the public hardly became aware of it, which is what I think created a lot of the uproar that, seems to have subsided, right? Well, if that's how that industry is approaching how they build data centers, and it seems like that is fairly consistent around the country, there's nothing that's keeping a community like West Fargo from being proactive and having the community dialogue ahead of time. Are we open to that kind of business in West Fargo? And if so, under what, circumstances? Or maybe we're not open. But let's have the community dialogue now, so that if that opportunity presents itself, 3 months from now or a year from now, it's, the city commission is a little bit more in a position to be able to negotiate something, that's coming quickly and that we have to act on, versus, the sort of political firestorm that otherwise kind of seems to happen. And so I think, again, just being really proactive. And that, I am going to ask in our very first commission meeting that we should have, before we finalize West Fargo's, growth plan, which is pretty final as of right now. I'd like to have something in there about data centers and is that something we're open to as a community, or is it not? And I don't have a vested interest either way in that answer.
Right.
There's a big financial opportunity, but there's probably a lot of public concern about it, and we should be having that conversation proactively so that we can answer the question. And if we're open for business, then we should tell people we're open for business, because
right,
there's probably some great opportunities that could come our way then.
Well, and we were just talking about it kind of between one of the breaks, is that our region is really competitive, and we're really unique in that bi-state region as well, where you have Minnesota and their individual policies, the state of North Dakota and their individual policies, but then also different communities and their policies, and how we're staying competitive, not only individually but as a region, to try to have that open for business mindset across our entire community. And I know we've talked in this show previously about some of the mandates and regulations over on the Minnesota side as well. So it's just always an interesting conversation. Mayor-elect Boschee, maybe we'll talk to you a little bit more about Fargo and how we attract, expand, and retain businesses in Fargo, and what that looks like underneath your leadership as the next mayor.
Yeah, so Fargo is kind of at this juxtaposition in the fact that we are hopefully getting to the end of the finalization of our land development code. But part of, I think, the conversation that needs to come with it as we wrap that up is the economic development incentives that we'll have in there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of conversations through the campaign, not only about special assessments when it comes to housing and growth, but also incentives for businesses and what we'd like to attract, or what type of jobs and things like that. So what I'd like to see is kind of more that proactive conversation, and that we're making sure we're dovetailing that so that there is that reliability, especially when it's the type of jobs and what our expectations of, or what people are getting paid, because that also helps alleviate the affordability standpoint. If we know that there's certain types of jobs that are paid a certain rate, that helps make sure that people are going to be able to afford to live here. And not to diminish the concerns of our citizens, but as a real estate agent who works with a lot of people who move here from around the country, our perspective is that things like our property taxes are high. People from other parts of the country are just ecstatic about what they can pay for property, and then the level of services they get with that.
Right.
And so that perspective is important, but at the same time, we also have to look at that public sentiment. And in the end, anytime any of our communities have taken a risk in investing in something, whether it is taking giving an incentive or payment in lieu of taxes or anything like that, we've usually come out on top. There's very few failures that we can talk about. And then, if we want to run government like a business, sometimes you have to take risk. That's what business does every day. But we just have to make sure that it's a tolerated risk that the public's okay with.
Yeah, when you bring up incentives, and I think there's a lot of conversation across our community that was kind of pre-election about incentives. I mean, we saw some votes at the school board level and the county level that were different than normal. I think different than what we had what we've kind of expected over the last 20 years. And I think the conversation about incentives is shifting because, one, the 3% property tax cap, but then also just the public sentiment about incentives, and trying to demyth them and try to dive a little bit deeper into incentives. And so we plan as a chamber to have some of those conversations, be the convener across school board, park board, county, city, just to be able to have a constructive conversation as we move into this new era of the city of Fargo, the city of West Fargo, the West Fargo Park District, all those different things, and how we move forward. With our last kind of few minutes here, I just want to talk a little bit more about kind of your first actions as mayor. You both get sworn in or officially take the office next Wednesday, and then we'll have a commission meeting shortly thereafter. Talk about kind of the first few things that you want to focus on immediately once you get the office all outfitted and ready to roll. What are the first few things that you plan to do as mayor? And we'll start with you, Mayor-elect Boschee.
Yeah, for me, again, it'll be continuing the conversation on housing. So I want to pull together a task force comprised of stakeholders around housing affordability, and then a second on an advisory council on renters. So I've been putting pen to paper on what that might look like. We'll be working with city staff to see what that looks like based on other conversations they've had. But my goal is, as somebody who has worked in government a long time and naturally falls into wanting to have the conversation and continue to learn space, is how do we make sure that when I set that up, both those up, they also, I don't want to say expedited timeline, but we have realistic timelines to move to action too. Yeah. Right? There's a lot of time, we can spend a lot of time talking about these things. We know they're an issue, so how do we get to that solution part and try to deploy some things, hopefully by the end of the year in some of those cases.
Great. Mayor-elect Gjerdevig.
I'm going to be pretty pragmatic. I think so much of it's going to revolve around the budget. We take office July 1st. We have basically a couple of months to pass a budget, with a new mayor and 2 new commissioners. That budget process kind of has to take a step or 2 backwards before it can take 3 steps forwards.
Right.
I think a lot of time and energy will go into that. In the first few months, the preliminary budget that the current commission has put forth already, I think, is in a pretty good spot. But I mean, there's always work to be done there.
Yeah. How can the business community be a productive partner in helping move your priorities forward? And I know we got just a few seconds here left in our show, but just talk a little bit about that. Maybe quick, Mayor-elect Gjerdevig. How can the business community help you through this process of shifting into mayor and then also your priorities?
Yeah, I think it's just about being engaged. And I think that's both to the business community and to residents. There's 2 instances in the last month that things that came before either our planning and zoning commission or our city commission, where 25, 30 residents came to the meeting, and in both cases we're kind of pushing back. But that's how city government should work, right? Mm-hmm. So it actually is a really positive sign about the level of engagement in our community when that many people care about a topic and show up and want to be heard.
Yeah. Mayor-elect Boschee.
I would second that. Just a matter of continuing the engagement, and I think for me specifically, I'm moving into the first full-time mayor, so that I think that opens up some opportunities to also expand the conversation beyond the traditional stakeholders. So, chamber, realtors, home builders who we really engage with, but how do I do a good job of making sure I get out to community groups, to the neighborhood coalitions, things like that, so that there's a good, robust conversation, and then bringing all those stakeholders together.
Yeah. For sure. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning on the Chamber Link. Again, joined this morning with Mayor-elect Josh Boschee of Fargo and Mayor-elect Eric Gjerdevig of West Fargo. Thank you for listening to the Chamber Link, and we'll end it there. Thank you.